Well, welcome everybody. What we want to do today is kind of take you through an overview, a very high level overview of the program. So the first thing I want to talk about in our presentation today is upcoming webinar schedule. After that, we will talk about the layout of CrossLink 1040. We're going to talk about the work in progress summary screen. We'll talk about the flow of tax preparation and how it is that our tools or features within the program itself help you. And then finally, we're going to finish up with the return interview and tax estimator features. Why I start with the upcoming webinar schedule is, again, this is a unique or a new way that we are going to present our webcast. And what we're going to do is, after this introduction, after we kind of lay out the software and kind of explain what a menu bar is and what a toolbar is and what the active window is, our webinars are going to take a different turn. Instead, they will begin focusing on completing returns from start to finish. So after this presentation, the next one that we have available to you, you'll get to see a simple return being started and all the way up to the point of transmission. And we're going to do the same again after that. The first one will be completing a simple return, which we'll be doing between Christmas and New Year. After that, we'll complete a return with earned income tax credits, and we'll do that at the beginning of the year, right after the first. We'll do each one of these 2 times. After that, we'll complete a return with depreciable assets. That'll be fun because we're going to be looking at Schedule C's and Schedule E's. The last 2 that we're going to be doing will actually be moving away from what we're talking about right here. We're still going to do an overview of the program, and we're going to do it in Spanish for the first time. We'll be doing that in January, as well as having a special webcast dedicated, a webcast title dedicated to IRS updates and new security expectations that are out there by the IRS right now. So we feel it's a very, very full and productive webcast schedule, but please understand that after this, we are actually going to be taking returns from beginning to end over the next 3 titles, completing a simple return, completing a return with earned income tax credit, as well as completing a return with depreciable assets. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the layout of the software, as well as the work in progress summary. And what we're going to do is we're going to delve into the program itself. And you'll notice when you land in the program, you're going to end up at the work in progress summary. This is always your landing page whenever accessing the program. And from that, there are some terms that we use whenever we do training. And we want to make sure that everyone's comfortable or understands exactly what it is we're talking about. And we're going to start up here near the top with what we call the menu bar. If you notice where I've got my icon pointing at, you'll see that these are menus. And what happens is each one of these is actually a pull-down menu. And from this, you can do different functions within the program. Now, when you are in the work in progress, like we are right now, these are generally associated with creating reports as well as administrative functions. Now, when I prop into the program, you're going to notice that this menu bar changes, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Right below the menu bar, the next thing that we'll want to make sure everyone's aware of, because we'll make reference to it, is our toolbar. And these are the function keys that you use whenever you're doing things in the program itself. Okay. Now, below that, this is the work in progress summary. And if you'll notice, it's made up of different queues. And these different queues include the tax returns queue, the transmit queue, the printing queue, as well as exceptions and rejects. These are important queues, and we're going to cover these one at a time in just a little bit. But before we do that, there are a couple of other key features or terms that we're going to be using that you need to know about as well. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to select a return. And in doing so, as I access it, I need to make sure that there are a couple other terms that we'll be referencing over and over again, and you know what they are. First, in the left-hand column right here, we have what we call our attached forms list. But what's nice over here is you can always tell exactly what kinds of forms have been added to the particular return. This is your attached forms list. On top of that, what's really interesting is you'll notice right in the middle, there's a running total that says, you know what, based on the information you've put into this particular return, the taxpayer either has money coming back or the taxpayer owes money. So it gives a running total of where exactly you are with regard to getting a refund or the customer getting a refund or whether or not the customer owes money. This changes every time information is put into the return, so it's completely dynamic. It gives you the information as you go through the return itself. So your attached forms list is found on the left-hand side. To the right of that is everything else. This is going to be the form that you're working in. As you notice, when we start a return, we go to our client data. And we'll talk about client data here in just a little bit. But regardless of where I go, if I add a form, you know what, and I sit there and I add a W-2, the W-2 would be exactly where it is that I would be on the right-hand side. You'll also know that W-2 has been added to the left-hand side on this type of thing. So I'm going to go back to my client data, but please understand that wherever I am, whatever form I'm working in, whatever worksheet or schedule, that's going to take up a majority of the page. It'll be everything that's right of the attached forms list. Okay? Down at the bottom is an important feature that people use all the time within our program. It's one of my favorite, and it's called the active window. And from the active window, regardless of what field you're in the program itself, it will tell you exactly what information the software is looking for. So as an example, we defaulted the DOB. And of course, people on this call, I'm sure you all know DOB means date of birth. But what if you didn't? What if you were new to doing taxes, or you're new to looking at our software, and this was the first field that you needed to populate after the Social Security number, which populates when you open the return? Well, it goes to DOB. You could always take a look down at the bottom, and it's going to give you that information. On top of that, in the active window, there are 3 icons. And when populated, they give you complete and immediate access to choices, and the choices are going to be things that you have a choice of whenever you're in a particular field. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a moment, as well as worksheets, and those are worksheets that correspond to the field that you're in, as well as form links. And form links means that if there's a form that is associated with what field you are in the program, that will be highlighted and you can go directly to it. So let's use a couple of things right here so we have an example of what we're talking about here. So if I were to go ahead and take a look at bank routing information right here, if the individual that I'm working with wanted to go ahead and have a direct deposit done, you'll notice the choices are populated down here. That's because I have preloaded a couple of different routing numbers for different banks before the season even started. And by doing that, I would have choices, and that means I can populate that information and have it readily available for me. On top of that, this database, just like many of them in the program, is dynamic, meaning that as you add routing numbers for banks, it will be available to you the next time. Now, if you did want to add routing numbers or things along those lines before the season starts, you can go up to your database pull-down menu, and from that, you can take a look, and this is a place where you can go ahead and add another routing number. So it's always great to be ready before the season starts, so you don't have to have that cheat sheet up in the corner of your desk. If you know the routing numbers of the different banks that your customers are going to, you can go ahead and have that information added before the season even starts. Take a look at your database, and there are all kinds of different things. You can preload your paid prepares. You can go ahead and preload occupations if you want. All kinds of different information can be found in your database pull-down menu. Okay? The last thing that I want to make sure everyone understands is the difference between blue fields and gray fields. So we're in the client data right now, and as you put information in, if I were to go ahead and put information into my blue fields simply mean these are the ones that you want to fill out. It will do calculations for me, and the information will then go into the gray fields. Now, you can put information directly into gray fields, but please know you're not allowing the program to do its calculations. And on top of that, when you go through a verification stage, it will be asked, are you sure you want to do this? Because again, the idea is to allow the program to do its work, which is allowed by the information that you put into it to run calculations for you. One last piece of information that we want to know as we kind of go through the lay of the land is the interview mode. And we're going to talk about interview further down the road in this presentation. But this is new for this year. I said that we are in a forms-based software, which we are. But if you needed some help with regard to finding out exactly what forms need to be added based on what the information the customer has, we have a brand new interview mode. And if you'll notice up in the toolbar, you can click on this. And from that, the return interview becomes available. And if the return interview is something that you want to do, you can go ahead and use this information to find out anything, whether it be miscellaneous credits, whether it be filing status, questions that need to be asked. You can go ahead and complete this, and it will tell you, based on the information you put into that, what exactly is required. What's nice about our interview mode, which we will revisit a little bit later as well, is that you can move in and out of it, meaning that if I'm in an interview mode, it doesn't mean that I can't go back to my client data and simply add forms as I want to. So with that, we just kind of wanted to make sure that you are aware of some of the terms that we're going to be using. Again, the attached forms, you go ahead and have your toolbar. You notice all the different function keys that are available. You're going to notice your menu bar and all the pull-down menus that are available to you, as well as the active window down at the bottom, which gives you the information you need should you not know what's being looked for in a particular field. Now, at this point, I'm going to go back to the work in progress page for just a moment because I want to make sure we explain all the different cues that are associated with that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this for the time being. And I'll go to my work in progress page. And from the work in progress page, there are different queues, as I said before. And the different queues, let's make sure we understand what they are. First of all, there's a tax returns queue. And this simply allows you to look at all the different returns that have been started on this particular application. If I wanted to, I can go ahead and select one of the returns, and I can do so by clicking there and then going to go, and there are all the different returns that have been started on this particular application. Now, we go ahead and we put them in the order. The default is chronological order by social security number. But let's say you would like to go ahead and look at your started returns a different way. In other words, if you wanted to look at it by taxpayer last name or home phone number created, please note that this on top here, these headers, and there are lots of them across the board here, they can be moved around. So instead, if I wanted to organize my returns by taxpayer's last name, I could simply go ahead and move this over into the predominant position. I can go ahead and move anything anywhere I want amongst the different headers right here. That's important to know because each person wants to run his or her business a little bit differently. Going back to the work in progress, a couple of other things that are important to know is that in the tax returns queue, there are training returns. And when it comes to training returns, what this simply means is that as you or preparers in your office or in your practice need to do practice, you can go ahead and click on here. Why is that so important? Well, it's going to give you a whole new database, and that database is not going to accrue results towards your reports, because we know that we want to make sure everything is pure as far as who has done taxes with you and all of those good things. So what we do is we make sure that there's a separate database that's available specifically for practicing, and that's going to be your training returns, which you'll find right here as well. New for this year, just to let you know, if you are subscribing or going to be using the TaxPass app, in other words, having your customers using the TaxPass app, if they go ahead and fill out information and send it to you as their tax professional, you'll see when they have sent information into you right here. This will be on the last line of the tax returns queue. Next up, we have a printing queue, and the printing queue below that, what's interesting about this is where you're going to get information on printing your checks. Now, depending on what banking or financial institution you're using, some of them will be through our program, some of them have their own software applications as well. So please understand that when it comes down to this, if you're using the software of the bank that you're using, great, go ahead and do that. If you're using it through our software, you're going to find the information and where it is that you print right here into the printing queue. Next up, in the right-hand corner, a very important queue is our transmit queue. And what our transmit queue allows us to do is when things are finished and ready to be transmitted, they will reside in this transmit queue until you go ahead and go in here and you transmit to central site. And what do we mean by central site? This is another term everyone should be familiar with. The central site is our clearinghouse. When CrossLink has a clearinghouse, it simply means everything's going to come from there, and then it's going to be processed to the IRS as well as the banking institution partners that we have. So that's where it comes to us, and then we send it on its way. So again, transmit queue is important, and in fact, one of the things we oftentimes tell people is that's one of the fields you want to make sure you're checking at the end of each day. You do not want to have a return ever be in a position where it's been transmitted out of being, you completed it, put it into the transmit queue, but forgot to transmit it. Because if you don't transmit it, then of course nothing happens and your customer isn't going to be getting his or her payment down the road because it hasn't gone to our clearinghouse or our central site on its way to the IRS. Okay. The last field that we have here is a very important one. This is exceptions and rejects. Why is this one so important? We know that completing a return, there is a process associated with it. We're going to talk a lot about that here in just a little bit. But what we talk about is you complete the client data. That's the information, the personal information of the taxpayer. You're then going to add your source forms, your secondary forms. You're going to go ahead and take the appropriate deductions, all those types of things. You're going to go through a verification stage. And then after the verification stage, you're going to print, you're going to transmit, you're going to wait for an acknowledgement by the IRS. And then of course, when it's done, you're going to be able to fund for your tax-paying client. What's interesting about this is if something gets to the IRS and it goes through a reject status, it brings the entire process to a screeching halt. Because of that, one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that, you know what, we know when there's a reject right away. And so in this particular case, of course, there aren't any rejects because I haven't transmitted any, but I'm going to bring up our 2017 program real quick. In other words, last year's program, just so we can show you something here. So I'm going to go ahead And if you'll bear with me for just a moment, I'm going to bring this up only so that we can show you something. I'm going to go ahead and close. If I go into my work in progress, I'm afraid I don't have one there here either, but I had other returns in here. I apologize, folks. But I could go through my federal rejects, and if I clicked on this, it would tell me exactly which return was in reject status. If I clicked on it again, it would tell me exactly what field the issue is, as well as a description in plain English. So please remember, this is an important cue to manage day in and day out. Simply put, when you take a look at your work in progress page, it's kind of important to remember a couple of things. First of all, importance of this number growing, because that means you have new people coming into your office. And of course, you want your printing queue cleaned out, as well as your transmit queue. And very important to understand that you take a look at your exceptions and rejects, because if there are any issues, you want to make sure you address them in a timely manner. All right, at this particular point, I've explained the main pieces of the work in progress summary. The last piece that I want to make sure that you understand is down where it says other items. And this is a queue as well. The most important two items in this. Number one is this is where you'll find software updates. So if an update is required for the program, you'll see this populated, and you're going to go ahead and click on that, and then you'll ask to restart the program. And then on top of that, the third item down is called bulletins. And why is bulletins important? We know that things are very fluid in the tax preparation business. And because of that, there's all kinds of late breaking news that you need to have access to. Things change all the time. And because of these types of things, we need to make sure that we can get information to you folks in a timely manner. And because of that, we have bulletins that are right within the program. And when you see this populated, make sure you're taking a look, or someone in your office is taking a look at it day in and day out, because it could be some very, very important information that you need to have access to in a very timely manner. Okay, so with that, I've kind of explained the work in progress summary page, as well as the layout of the program itself. So the next logical thing I want to talk to you about is kind of the process flow for completing returns. So let's go back into this. And what we're going to talk about is flow of tax preparation. So as I'm kind of going through this, let's go ahead and take a look at how you do a tax return. And certainly you folks are professionals, you know this, but we always find that whenever you're working with our software, the easiest way to learn as well as use our software is to follow a consistent process when preparing tax returns. So what am I talking about when I say a consistent process? Well, let's take a look at it. The first thing you'll want to do is gather the taxpayer's personal information and determine filing status. We certainly were in the client data screen, so you certainly saw how that worked. On top of that, you'll want to add dependents information as well as primary income source forms such as the W-2s. You have your secondary income source forms such as your schedules, your C and E specifically, and then you'll want to determine deductions and credits that you might have. After that, you'll want to determine healthcare coverage, which is also part of your client data, meaning that you need to gather this information. And what's very interesting, just on a side note, is what's going to happen with healthcare coverage. What's the ramification of changes that the Republican Party wants to make right now as they're determining the new updating the tax code? And what's going to be fascinating about that is we don't know quite yet. We're not going to know whether or not there can be penalties associated with people that don't have health care coverage. It's too early to tell. And then, again, that's one of the great reasons why you want to make sure you're paying attention to the bulletins that we send out. But as of today, the Obamacare, or what's known as the Affordable Care Act, is still in place. And because that, one of the things you have a responsibility to do as a tax professional is determine the health care coverage that the taxpayer has. After that, you'll determine any additional miscellaneous things that need to be claimed. You'll finish up by completing your due diligence and verification, and then you'll print, sign, transmit. You'll receive the IRS acknowledgement and then fund. This is the flow itself. Well, what's really interesting about this, and we talked about it just a little bit ago, is that you control the software when you're using a forms-based approach. You start with your client data, you would add your W-2s, you'd add your secondary forms, you'd add your deductions, all of those good things. However, at the same time, our return interview feature is available to facilitate throughout this entire process. Now, let's go ahead and bring the program back up, and I'm going to show you exactly what it is that I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to go back into this return. And as I go into the return itself, if I wanted to go ahead and access interview, you'll notice that it will help me with filing status. It'll help me with the personal information as well as dependents, income, adjustments and credits, healthcare coverage. All of these things are available should you want help or facilitation as you're going through the tax return itself. On top of that, remember, you can move within the program, into a forms management approach or use the interview. Either way, it works just fine. And as you're filling out fields, you simply need to check the ones that are appropriate. There's no reason why, if you're going through one of these different return interview fields, that if there's something that's a no, you don't even have to click it, just the things that are yes. Now, one other thing to remember is that is a return interview approach towards doing things. But if I want to add the forms myself, as I know many of you will want to do simply because you know taxes so well and everything along those lines, we again come up, we add forms, and of course, here is the field that we're going to be coming to. This field is going to give me a choice of all the different forms that are associated with the software. And you'll notice it's a very, very robust list. However, one of the interesting things is it's asking to remember all the form numbers and what they are, or all the schedule numbers and everything. In fact, if I wanted to, I could type a C and it'd take me right to my Schedule C. Or I could go ahead and reduce it and remove this. And if I wanted to go ahead and put a 2441, of course, it's going to take me to my child dependent care expenses. It's that quick. However, there are going to be some instances where I don't exactly remember what the number is. I don't remember exactly what it is, although I know that there is a form associated with it. A great feature that's in our program itself is something that's called the index. And I can pop onto my index, and then what I can do is I can just type in the information, and it's going to find it for me. Here's my child dependent care expenses, and guess what? It provides me the 2441. So I don't remember the number of a particular form or schedule. One of the nice things that's available to you is the ability to use the index. Now, I'm in the program itself. We've discussed the interview, and there's one last thing that's very important, and that is that I want to talk about our estimator. One of the things that's oftentimes overlooked is that when somebody starts a return, you'll notice that you can go ahead and use a forms approach. You can go ahead and use an interview approach, but we also provide the ability to give the customer an estimation. So if you wanted to, you can go up to your menu bar, and within the menu bar itself, you'll see a return pull-down menu. And the second choice that's down is a tax estimator. If I go ahead and click on this tax estimator, what it's going to allow me to do is go ahead and gather information from the taxpayer. The more information I get, the better the estimate's going to be. And at any point, I can give the individual an estimate of what it is that he or she could expect giving based on the information they provided me. What's really interesting about this is that if we went all the way back, I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I started a brand new return. You'll remember one of the things that's kind of interesting is that, you know what, the first thing that's being asked for is a social security number. So let's go ahead and I want to add new. But somebody comes into your office and they want an estimate. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, they say, I'd like an estimate, but I don't want to give you my social security number. Fine. That's a choice you can make as a tax professional, whether or not you want to help them out. But if you do, you can go ahead and put a pseudo number in here if you'd like. Go ahead and provide it again. And what will happen is it'll start a brand new return. And as I start my brand new return, I can then go up and I can run my estimation. So if I go and run my estimation, what's really interesting is based on the information I get, if the customer says, okay, I'd like you to do this return for me, you can go ahead and change this taxpayer's social security number. This is something that other softwares don't really offer. And it's wonderful because it's treating you like a professional. You don't have to start over. You don't have to recreate information. And the information that you put into this estimate will then pull over into the client data as well as into the other fields that are appropriate. So one of the nice things about a tax estimator is you don't have to be redundant or repeat work. Instead, you can do an estimate. And if the customer decides that he or she wants to do their return with you, you can go ahead and change the social security number, pull the information into the return, and away you go. So with that, that's kind of everything that I wanted to cover on a first go around. I said it would be about a half an hour. I think that we're right at that point right now. But hang on just a moment. We talked about the preparation, the flow, all those good things, and really kind of just brings us to the return and estimate feature, which we just talked about. My hope is that I was kind of clear in that those are both there to facilitate your ability to do returns. The estimator for people that just want to know how much they may potentially be getting. The return to facilitate the process flow if you don't know all the forms that are needed.